Hello, it's Helen Godden here, and we're ready to do block 8 of our Flower Power Quilt-a-long. This one is based on an iris, a bearded iris, very stylised, and you can see I've already made a few markings here to help me with the designs I wish to create. So this one is going to be the flying geese. So I've got that centre line and then the railway tracks that radiate around that curve, and it will really show off the curve of that design. As always, I have done my stitching in the ditch with my batting, so that's all done, and now the time is to add those fancy patterns. So you can see how having those markings certainly makes it a lot easier to know where to go, because you've already done some planning and some, preparation work. There we go. Now in this lovely curve, I'm going to do a basic feather with that Paisley shape. Now you might see when I do my feathers, I don't try and backtrack along those lines. That's when you're going to get the wobbles up and make it look not very attractive. So let there be a gap in between. There'll be consistently a gap, and it starts to look like that with your pattern all along. Before you start any kind of feathers though, you really need to practice that Paisley shape, which if we have a look here, the Paisley shape is that kind of shape. Okay, it's a teardrop with that chunk taken out of it. It's half a yin and a yang if you want to think of it that way. Okay, now you have to be able to practice that shape so you can do it any direction, upside down, inside out, all over the place before you can tackle feathers. So that's some homework for you, is to practice drawing that Paisley shape so that your hand gets used to how it looks, and then you're ready to try some feathers. One of the reasons it is a difficult one for most of us to tackle is that the Paisley shape is not something typical that we've learned in our alphabet. Okay, all other shapes that we do pretty well can come back to an E, an L, an S, an M, things in our alphabet that help us create that shape, but that's not the case with the Paisley shape. The other thing too to notice, that the fact that I'm working into that boundary means I know how wide to make my shape. Okay, so often beginners will just practice their feathers out in the middle of an open area, and of course it ends up all over the place because you need to have some boundaries. So whatever they are, whether they be the triangle of a block or the corner of whatever, having a boundary to work into helps. You also might find it advantage to draw yourself some diagonal lines to remind yourself of the angle that they need to come at. So often a beginner will come down here and those feathers will start just sticking out like sore thumbs, like a bunch of toes down the side of that spine. So by having that angle, it'll help remind you to keep that that angle of the feather and make it look right. Now, another thing that beginners make the mistake is they think they've got to have the exact same amount of feather, opposite each other on that stem. Well, the fact that we've got a curved spine or stem means the two sides do not have to be exactly the same. In fact, they can't be. Therefore, it's way more forgiving. So the important thing here is to notice that I'm sliding down that vein each time to make sure the angle of that feather is maintained. By not having stitched that centre line too, it's not going to be as heavy with that dark black stitch line. So this is the way to do a feather in the easiest way I can explain it to you. Now that's going to iron out, so don't worry about that. In the background over here, I'm going to show you one I call ribbon curls, which are based on a spiral, but we keep traveling back on ourselves, and we end up making what looks like ribbons or curling ribbons that you might put on a gift. So you make an open spiral, and now try to travel back on top of yourself. If it's not perfect, that's good, because that's where you'll get that ribbon effect. Okay, you can see there I did not travel exactly on top of myself, and it actually looks like a curling ribbon. Okay, so I'm going to keep just adding on to that and work our way up through this area here, and it's going to look very organic, like a growing vine or something. Okay, I quite like the way that looks. It's very organic, it's very natural. I've tried to ensure that it's touching the black there so that it hopefully looks like it goes behind the leaf there. So you can see there, by keeping that pattern going in those little negative areas, what a difference that makes to make the background push back and that flower come forward. Now this design I call squared off, and it's a series of horizontal and vertical lines that create boxes that extend and break into each other's boundaries. So you can see I keep making square shapes and then over completing that square to break forward into another area. But all my lines are either horizontal or vertical, and if I pause my hands at each of those corners, I will get that actual corner as opposed to a round corner. Okay, it really does look like a 70s wallpaper behind there. Here we go, little patch left. What are we going to do? Oh, we've got to do some stipple. Actually, no, we're going to do a diagonal elongated stipple, and I'm going to turn my block slightly so that it's facing me directly towards me, and it's going to make it easier to do this pattern. Now there's a very good example of where I let the pattern come to the edge here with a round. That was part of the design, but here, as it touched this black line, it's disappeared into it, which really implies that this is on top of that. Okay, that kind of thing's not so important if you're just doing a block quilt, but in a pictorial quilt, that kind of quilting it changes the depth of the field, the depth within the image. So now hopefully that flower, once it's all ironed, etc., that flower will come forward and this other quilting will look like it's behind. So that's what happens when we touch that black, it goes behind. So there we go. We've got block number 8, the iris, and come back for our last block for Flower Power Quilt-a-long, education and inspiration from HelenGodden.com. See you very soon.